Hello, Internet. We are finally doing it, finally getting it done. The day we've been waiting for, the great bearing review. And I was mother, look at that. Just bumped the camera, ruined the whole scene. We'll leave it in there. We're authentic around here, so you guys can see sort of what we deal with on the regular around here. Real talk around here. So this bearing video, I'm realizing, was never going to be what I really wanted it to be. I kept putting it off as I was trying to get more information and get things more accurate, and I think that actually goes to speaking a big part about what this is ultimately going to be and what I'm going to be recommending, because it's one of those things, there just isn't really a straight up answer across the board anywhere. There's so many variables. And there's probably going to be a little bit of stuff I'm going to talk about, so I'm going to get a couple things out of the way, and then maybe we'll just spin a spinner while we chat for a minute. But I just kind of want to show you, like, taking a bunch of notes, a bunch of spin times and different spinners, mostly the Triton because it has the longest spin times, but trying different spinners, seeing how they correlate to different size spinners with the same bearing. Does it scale up? And it's just, I mean, the amount of time and effort I put into this, it's pretty ridiculous. So yeah, I think what we're going to do is, I realize I don't have all the information I think I want either, so I think we're going to do a little cut near the end where we're going to talk a little bit more. Actually, maybe I'll do the cut now because there's just a tiny bit more information I want to get. I realized I didn't get necessarily all the pricing information I wanted to have for these. So we're going to do a little cut. But one thing I wanted to show before we did that, this doesn't really relate to this video, but you guys saw me talking about the boss, and I really wanted to kind of show off. Here we are inside so we can appreciate the lighting. I'm going to turn off this light. Maybe turn off that one too. We'll see. Here's your boss. Look how good she looks in there. See, we got that little light in there. Oh, looks good. This is the presentation you receive when you get the boss. Let's turn those lights back on. Really just sparkling, just shining, just looks real good. So I wanted you guys to be able to appreciate that. So we're gonna close this up. We're gonna do a quick cut, and then I'm gonna be right back. All right, everybody, did you miss me? I should also say we're drinking some Hennessy today, so I definitely need a drink for this video. And I'm all out of beer, and I really enjoy Hennessy. I'm not gonna lie, the way to drink it is neat and warm, so you should actually hold it in your hand and warm it up, get it to room temperature if you're gonna drink this stuff. And savor, enjoy the flavor. I mean, it's kind of a dessert wine, so it's pretty, or dessert liquor, so it's kind of sweet. That's just the way to drink it, so. Anyway, so what I wanted to get was, I wanted to get just a tiny bit of info because I didn't realize I didn't have all the pricing info memorized, and I just needed to look that up, and I didn't want to have to cut it in. I want to be able to kind of have that as we go along, and I was going to save it to the end, but then I had a good idea, so I wasn't going to change too much of what I had to say. But yeah, so let's look at the Grave Raven for a second. Maybe we'll spin that for a second. I'm going to use the compo form for what I'm doing here today because the buttons are easy to take on and off, and this bearing ring is probably the fastest for getting things in and out. So I got a bunch of points I want to make in no particular order. I don't know if this order is going to necessarily make sense, but kind of let's get into it just a little bit. So first things first is why would you want to switch the bearing or have extra bearings in your spinner? So a couple reasons. One is you make it a cheap spinner with a cheap bearing, and upgrading the bearing in your spinner can do quite a lot for the spin game. So that's the number one reason, is you want to change how that spinner feels. Number two is the bearing's been damaged. So maybe you didn't clean it well enough and it got rust, or you dropped it, especially some of probably the softer bearings, like one drop, for example. A lot of people will say they dropped that, and that's what one drop stands for. You drop it once and you need a new one. So we'll get into that a little bit, but that's kind of the two main reasons generally that you would want to switch out your bearing, is you want to change the feel of the spinner, or you have an issue where the bearing got damaged, or even just, you know, you've got a cheap, I guess three reasons, because you could have a cheap spinner with a cheap bearing and you want to upgrade that. So in my experience, in kind of the cross testing, let me just show you kind of what we're working with. So I got the bearings that I'm mainly going to be talking about, like aftermarket style bearings here, but I've kept all my bearings, look at this. Tried to keep them organized. I'm using Sharpie on the sides of them so I can grab any bearing and say, okay, this came from that Triper stone. What I called the Triper stone I got off Amazon. This was the bearing that was in my stainless steel stubby. So I really can kind of keep my bearings organized. I should also say I apologize I'm starting to get a bit of a cough. Hopefully that won't be an issue here. And I should also apologize. This is going to be a long one. You will know that already because you'll see how long the video is, but there's no way this is going to be fast. So I really tried a bunch of bearings, and especially all the bearings that came, the factory bearings, the bearings, the OEM bearings that came in it. Trying those out as well. And for the most part, the higher end bearings had higher end, or the higher end spinners had higher end bearings. And even something like the Busy Minds bearings, for example, I found were pretty nice, but they're coming in, you know, spinner designed by Zero Feud, so you imagine that those guys are going to probably put a good bearing in there. Unrelated point, but a lot of spinner manufacturers seem to like to keep which bearings they're using secret, with the exception of a few. Anybody that's using a one-drop bearing usually wants to tell you they're using a one-drop bearing because of what that means, and we'll get into that if you don't know already. And then there's a handful of makers right now that are using the Flavor Zone Essentials, the Hec Ferulla bearings, which we're definitely going to talk about as well. And we're going to open with those when we get into this. So, yeah, so what else? You know, depending on the type of bearing that you get and what you like in here is going to depend on a lot of personal taste and a lot of personal preference. So I think we'll probably get more into that in the end as kind of some of our closing thoughts. So I think that's all I kind of really want to talk about, and then some of the stuff we'll get in as we go into it, and then some of it we'll get into as we you know, as we wrap up. So Grave Raven, super sweet. We'll give you a little airtime. You haven't been talked about in a while. So let's take a look at a couple bearings here. I'm going to try and keep them in order, but the first one, and I'm not actually going to quite get under the hood of this one quite yet, but this is one of Hec Ferulla's bearing, the stainless steel super bearing. So SSSB is what he calls them. How's our light? Let's move this right up here. So what we can see in here is with these bearings, let's just talk about the parts of a bearing a little bit. You've got the races, which are the parts of the bearing, the outside here. And then the inside, so those are your inner race and your outer race. Now, if you look inside, we might be able to get the light. There's a bit of a groove or a track for the bearings to run around in. And I'm no bearing expert, I should say, so some of this may not be 100% accurate. I tried to look up a little bit of information, but so if something's wrong, feel free to comment below, and I'll try my best to get that information updated. But anyway, so we got the the inner and the outer races. Now those can be stainless steel, or those can be ceramic. Most of the time in the spinner game, you're going to find them being stainless steel. Ceramic bearings tend to be a lot noisier, a lot more feedback, and much more expensive, probably because it's harder to manufacture with as hard as the ceramic is. Then you've got your bearings themselves, which in this case are stainless steel. They're the little stainless steel bearings in there. Pretty straightforward, little tiny balls. They can be anywhere from you know, in an R188, I think the least I've seen in most cases is 8 balls. 8 to 10 seems to be the standard. Some of them are 9, but usually you're looking at an 8 or a 10 ball. Some of the larger ones, like the the 608s. We're not going to be talking about other size bearings as well, but just to kind of show you. On these bigger bearings, a lot of times I see less balls. Like, so this one has 7, for example. So sometimes on these bigger ones, you'll see quite a variation in the number of balls that are in there. But with the R188, you're normally looking at an 8 ball or a 10 ball, and for the most part, it's 10 ball these days. So I think when the spinner game was starting, you saw a lot of 8 balls, but you know, 8 balls come in the stubby and some other ones, but more often than not, you're going to be looking at the 10 ball. Then you've got the cage. Most bearings that we're going to be looking at, all the bearings we're going to be looking at today, but most bearings you'll see out there have a cage of some sort. Some of them will be free, where the balls can basically just roam around and do whatever they want. But in this, we've got a nylon cage. So basically the thing keeping the balls spaced out and keeping them even is the cage. So you can see it better on this side. So with the nylon ones, they're usually flat on the bottom, and then they kind of got little cups or whatever for the bearing. So if we take a look at something like the Spinetic, you'll notice that the bottom of the Spinetic is a little rounded and not quite as wide as it is on this Hec Ferulla bearing. You also have stainless steel cages. So something like this. So there's a cage around the balls, and in this case it's stainless steel. And those are usually the same on either side. All right, and then you have shielded bearings, where there's actually a plate. Whoops, sorry for bumping the camera. A plate over the bearing. So this is a one drop. You've got this little C-clip that is an absolute pain to get out. Some people I see like do videos. You basically need to jam a pin up against this corner to pop them out, and then the shield falls right off. But this, especially for lubed bearings, when a bearing is lubed, it has some sort of liquid on there, right, or some sort of lubricant, right? And dust and stuff can stick to that and make it real bad real quick. So especially with lube bearings, you really want it shielded. And then we've got 2 different types of balls. So let's grab our. So this has a stainless steel cage that's a little different. It's sort of only on one side, so it sort of matches those nylon style bearings. But we've got two different types of balls. So, whoops. So this is a hybrid ceramic, where we've got ceramic balls, right? So we got the black balls in there, no jokes, and then we got the stainless steel balls in here. Now with ceramic balls, the unique thing with them is the ceramic is harder than the stainless steel, so a lot of times it will kind of polish and grind away at the race, smoothing things out. So usually with a stainless steel race and a ceramic bearing, you have a break-in period where they get a little better, a little faster, a little smoother over time as you use them. I don't know what the consistency is in terms of how long that takes. For me, I can usually start to feel a difference after using it for, say, like a full day, probably 2-3 hours of like really hard fidgeting in a heavy spinner. You can really feel it start to smooth out. But I don't really know what the standard is for how long it really takes to be what you would consider fully broken in. I switch my bearings so much, it's kind of hard to say. So let's get in there a little bit, and let's talk about them right off the bat. So actually, since we're already 8 minutes in, plus I think the 2 minutes I had before, I think I want to save some people from maybe having to watch all the way to the end. What I'm going to tell you is you probably should buy a couple of every one of these. Just about everyone. As we go, I'll recommend them. But the reality is each of these feel a tiny bit different, and everybody's feelings for what bearing you like is going to be a little different. So you may prefer this one, you may prefer this one. You also may prefer this one in one spinner and this one in another spinner. So it's all a very personal thing. There's no right or wrong answer here. So you're probably best off getting a couple of these, getting a couple of these, getting a couple of these. So I'm not going to be able to give you a definitive answer at the end, but anyway, on with the show. So this we're going to start with, and I think I just wiped it off a little bit here, but this is the stainless steel super bearing, or SSB Hec Ferulla's bearings. Kind of the first one to really kind of break out on the scene with the kind of bearing game that we're seeing now. So prior to this bearing coming out, really you either had the bearing that came in the spinner, or you would get a one drop, or there were some other ones out there, but not a lot of people seem to be really upgrading their bearings after the fact. Hec came on the scene and really started hooking us up with these super bearings, really promoting them, and all of a sudden you started to see the bearing game start to explode a little bit. So these bearings are notably smooth, almost one drop smooth. Not a lot of noise, not a lot of feedback, but just a little, the slightest little bit of feedback. It's so tactile, you really have to have your hands on it to feel it. But it really is a super, super smooth bearing. Super smooth feel in hand, very little feedback, very little sound, very quiet bearing, but still manages some good spin times. So I guess I should say that as well. We're not going to talk a lot of specific spin times. I found spin times vary greatly from even within like a 5-pack of super bearings, right? I'll get variations in spin time, but for stainless steel bearings, you're looking at in the range of 8 to 10 minutes what I was getting in my Triton. When we do talk spin times, we're going to kind of put them in terms of the Triton, because that's the one I did the most spinning on. So 8 to 10 minutes in a Triton is pretty good spin times for these guys, but they feel really smooth. They still give you a little bit of feedback. Probably one of my go-to bearings and something I'm not too worried about for a spin time. They're also very affordable. He sells them in 5 packs for 11 bucks. So you're looking at about $2.20 a bearing. So again, most bearings are not going to be very expensive either. We'll get into that as we go. But really, really nice bearing. We're going to have to keep going here. We're going to be here all day. It's going to be a long one, y'all, I told you. Whoa, that wasn't supposed to happen. All right, we're going to use this one for now. That's why we got 2, right? Let's hope that doesn't happen. That's the first time that's ever happened to me. And of course, it would happen on camera. So this is the SBV2, the notorious bearing. Originally, Hec was under the impression that it was stainless steel. I think what it is I think there's a difference in the chrome. I think these stainless steel balls are chromed to help give them some smoothness, and basically just the finish on these two looks ever so different. It's very subtle. It's not a huge difference. And then as you would expect, there's actually not a huge difference in spin feel. I find that it almost doesn't matter. You can get a sample pack, which is really cool. You can get one of each for $5. So $2.50 a bearing, so pretty good deal. So Hec likes to hook it up. Let's put this on here. And again, very, very smooth spinner. Maybe a little bit of feedback. We might hear a little bit of something. I think I got a little bit of debris in here. Yeah, you hear that vibration. That's not normal. But so these I get around. I mean, I can hardly tell the difference between the two. Some people say these spin a little faster. Some people seem to think the other ones spin a little faster. And again, I think that's just the variation you get, the noise and the smoothness. These are probably, when it doesn't have this little bouncing in here, probably feel a little bit smoother. But I can't say I've really gotten a noticeable difference in spin time between the two. So for me, this is where, get a sample pack or spend 22 bucks and get 2 5-packs of each and just have something to upgrade your spinners in, because they're both really good bearings. I can use them interchangeably personally. I love them both, so they're both good bearings. So, and honestly, unless I had the 2 spinners side by side that were exactly the same, spinning them at the same time, I personally can't really tell the difference, and I've spun a lot of bearings. But again, in this bearing game, the tolerances, I think, on this end of the spectrum vary enough where you can get 2 similar bearings that will still feel somewhat different. One more thing we want to say on these guys before we move on. Hec is a tremendous guy. He's a big part of the community. He's out there running giveaways. He's out there sharing. He's one of us. So he's someone that is definitely worth supporting as well. So good guy, good customer service, really open, really great communication, always looking out for us. Quite often, and I don't want to put him on the spot and have you feel bad because these are good deals. Quite often he'll send in extras in there. You'll get extra bearings from him all the time. Like, it's not unheard of to see that. Now that said, don't get upset if you don't get something extra. It's just one of those things. He's in there throwing things out, or throwing things not out, but like throwing things in the bag all the time. So really good guy. We love what he's doing over there. So he's definitely one you can support. You can get those bearings and you can feel good about yourself at the end of the day. Moving along, we're going to get into the Fidget HQ portion of the program here. So we've got, these are the new Fidget HQ high velocity bearings. Something I want to say as well as we move along here. Fidget HQ has what they call a Zen Spin, which is this, it's this one here. And if you look at these, they're very similar to the Hec Ferulla bearings in many ways. Now, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if they're the same vendor that they're using somehow, whether they know it or not, or that there's multiple vendors who are themselves getting it from a similar place. And a very similar thing with, so this is the Stealth hybrid ceramic versus the Fidget HQ, hybrid ceramic. They're using very similar cages. They've got a very similar feel. So same sort of thing. So we'll get into that as we go here, but I kind of wanted to point that out as we start moving into the Fidget HQ portion of the program. So we'll pop this in there. Now we'll talk about this. Now the Fidget HQ high velocity is a hybrid ceramic bearing. It's using silicon nitride, which is the black ceramic balls. I forget the name of the white. You generally see the white only in full ceramic. Sometimes you'll see full ceramic with black balls and white races. But I don't think I've ever seen the white balls in a hybrid ceramic. I'm not sure why that is, and I forget what that is. But, so let's spin this guy. So this guy, and probably should do this as we go here a little bit too. These hybrid ceramics have a little bit more of this up and down play, but I think that's necessary for some of the spin times they get. So the reason you get one of these, in my opinion, is it gives you a little bit more feedback, still very smooth, but gets tremendous spin times. So these out of the box, in most cases, we're getting like in the 12-minute range in my Triton. Out of the box before being broken in, and I've gotten upwards of 15-16 minutes in the Triton, which is the high end of the spin time scale. So the real reason you get a hybrid ceramic is, one, there's a certain feel, and it's not just the feedback. I mean, it is the feedback, and it's hard to tell until you really get in your hand and spin a lot. But there's something with a hybrid ceramic and those harder balls that you can kind of feel that hardness. It's hard to explain. But for me, hybrid ceramics are the ones I like the most. So more often than not, I'm going to be looking for a hybrid ceramic in my spinners. I like that tiny bit of feedback. I like that vibration. It's just, you can tell. You can tell when you spin enough. So we really dig these. The looseness, though, depending on what you have, sometimes makes it feel almost cheap, but that's part of what gives it, again, those really good spin times. So depending on the spinner you have and the tolerance with the buttons, sometimes that could be an issue. But hybrid ceramics, good to go. And these high velocity ones from Fidget HQ, they are legit. They're the real deal. So they're $4.49, I think right now. I don't know if it's an all the time thing, but it looks like on Fidget HQ you get them in either 1 or 2 packs, and if you get 2 packs, you save a little bit of dough. So we're looking at about $4.50 or $8 for 2, so you save $1 if you buy 2. So, and I would almost always recommend buying 2. It's nice to have a few extra bearings laying around. Doesn't hurt. you don't have to wait for them to ship. Like, you don't have to be like, oh, my spinner's dead, and now I got to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days for those bearings to come in the mail. So, hybrid ceramic bearings, really, really good. We love these. Moving on, Fidget HQ recently. Now I picked up some of their previous hybrid ceramics. I actually got 5 of them, so that I could test them. And as you can imagine, the spin times between all of them varied quite a bit. I was getting anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes out of the box, and upwards of, I think, 12 to 14 minutes once it felt like they were probably broken in. So not quite as good as those newer ones. But the nice things with these is they're a little cheaper. So they're $3.99 or 2 for $7.25. So a little bit cheaper, not much. And if it were me, I'd probably spring the extra bit for those high velocity ones. But they're a little smoother. Maybe smoother is not the right word, but they've got a little bit less of this up and down play. I don't know if you can see that. A little bit less of that. A little bit less noise, but also a little bit less spin time. What was I getting in the? I think I was getting closer to the 10 minutes. So these were kind of rivaling some of the really high-end stainless steel bearings. It's that one step up, somewhere in between these two, where you're getting a little bit of feedback, but you're still really smooth, getting good spin time, but you have that hybrid ceramic feel. Sorry about that, y'all. Maybe we should have a sip of Hennessy. Keep going here. I've only been talking for 18 minutes straight. All right. But really, really like these. I like these more than I thought I would, especially because I kind of really want those like high end. So if I'm looking for something that I want that hybrid feel, but I'm not too concerned about spin time, this gives you a little bit less play, and they're a little bit cheaper. Again, I think for the most part, honestly, I know I said I would pick these up, spend the extra dough and pick these up. The reality is I would strongly recommend picking up 2 of each. So get the 2-pack of each of these, you know, and then you've got 1 of each to go. So, all right, let's move on down the line. So we like these new stainless steel cages, hybrid ceramics from Fidget HQ. Good bearings. Next, we get the Zen Spin. Now they use a chrome, and they look pretty much the same as the Hec Ferulla bearings, the Flavor Zone Essentials bearings. So I think his bearings are chromed as well. So we got the nylon races here. Now these bearings are also a really good deal. They're $1.99 each, or 2 for $3.50. So they're actually technically a tiny bit cheaper than what Hec's selling over there. Raj over at Fidget HQ. But, how do they feel? I'll be honest, they feel dang near the same. Maybe a little bit more noise, but super smooth. And there's a softness to it. There's kind of a softness versus a hardness versus the hybrid ceramic balls. So really good bearing. Really, really good spin times for these kind of things too. So the same sort of thing. These were getting in the neighborhood of 11 minutes in my Triton. So a little bit more spin time I was finding, but also again a little bit more noise I was thinking. So real hard to say, but again, what I would recommend, pick up 2 of these. So these are on the recommend list. Almost everything in here is on the recommend list. There's really only 2 that are going to be hard for me to recommend. 2.5 maybe. So if you get a bearing that's stuck, Sharpie is great for pushing it out. All right, what's next? We got the Alphabat bearing. So this bearing, these guys were kind of big on the scene early, and they are probably some of the highest performing stainless steel bearings out there, but they're also some of the most expensive in terms of what we're going to be looking at today. So these for stainless steel are 2 for $9. I think you can only get them in 2 packs. They make a little bit more noise, but they've had tremendous spin times. Now, I think, me personally, I got some of the lower end of the spin time, since they all seem to vary quite a bit in bearing to bearing in terms of spin time. We get a good little vibration, good little feedback, not a lot of noise, still a very smooth feel with a little bit of noise. But these were some of the highest stainless steel speed bearings I was getting. I don't think I had any stainless steel bearings before getting these really nice ones from Hec and from Raj over at Fidget HQ that were getting in the 10-minute range. And these were getting in 10, 11 minutes on my Triton. So again, really good bearings in terms of spin time, some of the best spin time out there, and some good little feedback. But again, for that feedback, for that speed, I can't really recommend them because the 2 for $9, either way, I'd rather have either the Fidget HQ hybrid ceramics for $8 or $7.25. So it's hard to recommend these, although I know a lot of people stand by them. They're definitely a good bearing. And there's, you know, when we're talking about this at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal to spend $10, $9, and get a couple of them. So it's good to have a couple on hand to test and see what you like. So, but again, I wouldn't recommend these unless you're really trying to get a full gamut of bearings to see what you like to feel of yourself. And that Hennessy is good, y'all. It's a little more. We're all business today. We don't have a lot of puns to make. So here we've got the Stealth Hybrid Ceramic Bearing. Let's pop that in here. Now, as you can imagine, this is going to feel a lot like the Fidget HQ one, based on what I've told you so far. All right, so let's pop that in there. So the Stealth, the same sort of thing. Now, these are a little pricier. These are $6 per bearing, but they've done some deals and stuff like that. You usually can get discounts on their site. You can get free shipping from time to time. They put them in the spinner box often, so getting one or two of these is definitely probably the way to go. Now, these to me feel like they've got, you know, a very similar up and down play. I'm sorry I didn't show you the up and down play all along here, but it's kind of hard to really see the difference. They feel a little bit smoother than the you know, a little bit more dampened is probably the word I'd be looking for than the Fidget HQ ones. These are my go-to for a lot as well, because I've got a couple of these laying around. Again, from Spinner Box and other spinners, like the Copper Aventador came with one in it. So I kind of have been tossing these bearings in quite a few things. My stainless steel stubby has one of these, so I'm a big fan of these. Really good spin times, but again, spin times seem to vary a little bit. You know, out of the box, I'm often getting in the 12-minute neighborhood, but I've had that fluctuate quite a bit, and then you try to break them in, you try to clean them. So, but really good bearings, a little pricier, and they feel like the hybrid ceramics from Fidget HQ quite a bit. So, excuse me. But really solid bearings, really good spin times, really good feel. Pretty smooth, again, probably just the tiniest bit smoother than those Fidget HQ ones and the tiniest bit quieter. But I think their spin time on average seems to be a little bit less. The Fidget HQ high velocities seem to be some of the best spin times I get. But the Stealth is definitely up there. Next, we've got a 1-drop. Now this is one that is definitely cleaned because I actually de-shielded and cleaned it. I think it was cleaned to begin with. So 1-drop. Now we think, I don't know for sure, but I think part of the 1-drop magic is they use chromed balls as well, but it's kind of hard to see under the cage, obviously, and then within in the races, or under the shield and then under the cage. So very, very smooth. A lot of what we're hearing here is the spinner itself, but there's a little bit of noise from the one that's been cleaned, at least cleaned by me, but there is definitely a very nice smoothness to it. Not a whole lot of up and down, and even when you move it up and down, there's like a softness you feel when you move it up and down. So 1-drop bearings are some of the more expensive for stainless steel, some of the more expensive on this list period. They're $8 per. If you get them in 5 and 10 packs, I think you can get them for as little as $6.40. And if you shop around, there's some yo-yo sites out there that occasionally have deals. I think the best deal I got was a 5-pack for $25. And then I think there was a coupon code at checkout on top of that. But you don't find that too often. So these are some of the more expensive ones out there. And for me, they're too smooth 90% of the time. You know, they're good in the Trillium, but almost everything else, I've recently switched out my chakra to a hybrid ceramic. If you watch Fabian's most recent video, he talks about taking the hybrid ceramic out of the arrow and throwing it in the chakra and then falling in love with the chakra. And I really love the chakra for its smoothness, but through a hybrid ceramic in it, man, and I like it more. I do. So the 1-drop bearings for me are just too smooth. Now I know a lot of people like the smoothness. I know a lot of people like the feedback, but I think this is a situation where you owe it to yourself. Like when it comes to smoothness, do not get the cleaned one. So let's move on down the line. I spent probably too long on that one. Get yourself a lubed 1-drop. The reason you get a 1-drop is because it's smooth. You don't get it for spin time, you get it because it's smooth. And the smoothest 1-drops are the ones that are lubed. So let the pros do it. There is lube that you can get out there and put it in yourself. Different versions of yo-yo lube. 1-drop sells a lube. Sewing machine oil I think is really good. Alana over at Fidget Haven does. Smooth. 100% butter, no margarine. Bill. But yes, so that's a smooth bearing. But again, for most spinners, I want to feel it a little bit. Now, sometimes you're in the mood for this, and this is nice, so it's nice having a spinner maybe like this. So for me, you know, my Namaste will probably always have a 1-drop in it, because when I really want the smoothness, but I know that 9 times out of 10, when I want a fidget, if it came down to the Namaste or the chakra, I'm going to want the chakra, and I'm going to want that little bit of feedback. But if I want the smoothness, I can have it in there. But also, have a couple of these on hand so you can throw it in a spinner when you get it. And then say, hey, you know what? This one actually I prefer the smoothness in, because that's a choice only you can make. That's going to be the theme here today, is you really want a couple of each, and then you want to see what you like in any particular spinner. And I would go as far as to say you probably should have just about one of all of these not in a spinner, so one extra. So when a new spinner comes in, boom, 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 you try them all, and you say, with this one, I like this, and then you use another one so that the next time a spinner comes in, you still have one to test with. So let's move on. This is an interesting one. This is a Terrapin. Now, I don't want to knock the guy too much because I really don't know a whole lot, but I feel like he doesn't have necessarily the best name in the community. It seems like a lot of people have some negative things to say. And I haven't really seen anything too much myself. But these bearings to me feel like they're over-engineered for what we need. Now, this is probably a little noisy because I think it needs a clean. So this is what they call their flat hybrid ceramic. And this really isn't probably a good indication of it, but this is a $20 hybrid ceramic bearing. It's the most expensive bearing I've tried. Now, this bearing is designed for yo-yo sleeps. And again, I think it's just one of those things where it's over-engineered. Like the tolerances and everything are so high, I would imagine you would get a very high consistency. I don't think these require much, if any, break-in, so there's something to be said for that. But we're talking about spinners. We're not talking about like high-end performance machines. So for this guy, with the idea of it being made for yo-yo sleeps, it's made to spin more vertically, and it actually does that. I get about 6 minutes on a table spin with my Triton, where I was getting 12+ minutes on a vertical pretty consistently. Almost every spinner I put it in, it was just about double on a vertical spin than a horizontal spin. So the engineering, the tolerances, the design is over the top on something like this, but I think in the spinner game, the performance isn't quite there. I can't recommend actually purchasing these. Now I know some high-end spinners out there use his bearings because he posts every once in a while that, you know, he's sent out 200-300 bearings. I wouldn't be surprised to see them in some kind of higher-end things like either you know, like a Zero Feud or you know, Random Fabrications Portal or something along those lines. Kind of like the higher-end scale where they really want those tolerances and they want that end user experience to be very consistent. They'll spend the extra money on that. So. But again, hard for me to recommend. Still a high quality bearing. This is one that would probably last you 1,000 years. This will probably, if we were to spin all of these in spinners nonstop until they break, I bet this would go the longest without failing. But again, the tolerances, the performance that we're looking for here, again, I just think you're paying for more than you need. Just a personal opinion. Still good. Into the Spinetic light of things. Now, the Spinetic have been doing hybrid ceramics for a while. They were also one of the first ones out there with aftermarket bearings, I think, of this quality. Because they're nice and they're a little on the more expensive side as far as hybrid ceramics go. So the Spinetic ones are $4.99, $5 for the ones with a nylon cage. And $4.49, $4.50 for the ones with the stainless steel cage. So this is the nylon cage. When I first got it, it felt like it was a little more rattly, a little bit more noisy, a little bit more feedback, not in a really bad way. See that up and down? A little looser. Still really good spin times. But I didn't have a feel for it, but I got this pretty early in my spinner game career where I don't think I really appreciated the subtle feedback you get to feel the differences of a spinner. Like a super smooth bearing in a spinner, you know, this is going to contradict some of what I said in like the chakra versus the trillium, but when you put a 1-drop, it takes away and dampens a lot of the feel of the spinner, so you actually lose a lot of the individuality of the spinner, where a hybrid ceramic's going to give you slightly different feedback and vibration based on the spinner. Again, I know that contradicts what I've said a little bit, but there is some truth to that as well. Like a 1-drop is going to, you know, that smoothness is going to kind of take away. So being able to appreciate the feedback that you get with some of these guys, you know, in different spinners is something that I like. So the hybrid ceramic is from Spinetic with a nylon cage is pretty good. It's hard for me to recommend it, but I do really like this bearing a lot as I kind of mature in the spinner game. But probably the one that's gotten the #1 best spin time, but I think part of that is the amount of time I've spent the amount of time I've spent breaking it in and really testing it and cleaning it. Like, this is the one I was using the longest before I got a lot of these other bearings, or they weren't out there. I was working this bearing all day trying to get the most spin time out of my Triton. And I think I got into the 16-30 minute range with this. So this is a spin time bearing for sure. But I think if I put the same amount of effort into some of these like high velocity or the stealth hybrid ceramics, I would also get similar spin times, to be fair. Still, again, very smooth bearing, a little bit of feedback, very similar feel to the, as you would imagine, the hybrid ceramic from Fidget HQ with the stainless steel balls. But again, this is going to be a little cheaper. You know, you're looking at $4 as opposed to $4.50 or 2 for $7.25. So, yeah, there we go. So that was probably too long. If anybody stuck around this long, God bless you. But let's kind of wrap it up here, and let's talk a little bit just to kind of to put the kibosh on this. So again, I think for me, the really nice thing, let's spin this for a minute while we kind of wrap this up. We saw this compo form spinning quite enough, although we love that compo form over here in Hobby Timmy. For me, the best thing about what's going on with these bearings is there are some subtle differences between all of them, but even again, between a 5-pack of these, you're going to notice some subtle differences. So while there are some subtle differences, there's also a lot of similarities across the board, which is actually good for us because most of these are done by good people in the that support the community a lot. So just because you don't support the community doesn't mean you're not a good person, but seeing the time and effort, you know, Hec Ferulla, like, he's a big presence out there. You see him all over the place. Raja from Fidget HQ isn't quite as big on the scene, but he does a lot of back-end stuff. Just to share a quick story about him, I ordered the Quasar in tungsten, and there was an issue with my email. He notices that, so he sends me personal emails that he forwards when he sends out the updates on that, because my email gets bounced. He's reached out and communicated to me, told me about what's going on. Like, he's just been a really good guy. The amount of communities or customer service I've seen from him is fantastic. So Raj over at Fidget HQ, love the work he's doing too. Max over at Stealth, you know, he's the same sort of thing. He's very similar, but a little different, you know, to someone like Hec Ferulla, where you see him posting out there a lot. He's not just, you know, of course he wants to pimp his own stuff and put it out there, but he's not afraid to kind of engage with the community and other makers and recognize that there's other spinners and other bearings besides Stealth out there. And it should also go and be said that most of these guys are friendly towards each other as well. You know, I know Hec Ferulla isn't just like, oh, screw Raja, I'm trying to sell my bearings. No, like, he's all on board with knowing that there's other people out there, and he wants, at the end of the day, the customer to be happy. So, and then, you know, Josh Young over at Spinetic, right? They do a lot of great work, right? I don't have to tell you about them. Most people probably know that as well. You know, they do a lot working with charity. You know, they do good customer service. I've had nothing but good responses for the few issues I've had with orders. They've always made it right. They're always good people. So the reality is, even if you don't want to get one of each, you can support whoever you want and be happy about it. So the prices are close enough where, for me, I would support whoever's got your back out there. You know, so if Raj has been taking care of you, get some Fidget HQ bearings, right? If Max has been taking care of you, get some of those hybrid ceramics over at Stealth. You know, if Hec Ferulla has been taking care of you, we know he has, you know, get some of those Flavor Zone Essential bearings. But for me, I would strongly recommend getting SB1, and so this is the real recommendation. You get the Flavor Zone Super Bearings. You get the Super Bearing version 2. You get the hybrid ceramics from Fidget HQ. You get the hybrid ceramics with the steel cages from Fidget HQ. These you can take or leave, but they feel very similar to these. So if you don't have these, definitely get these. If you've got these, you can kind of take or leave. They're Zen Spins. Alphabat, I can't really personally recommend, just because I find they don't offer something at a price that makes sense with everything else. The Stealth, I would recommend if you've got the high velocity or the Stealth. These you can kind of take or leave, but you definitely want at least one. And for me, with the amount of them I've tried 3 of these and probably 7 or 8 of these. There's enough subtle differences where it feels like they're 2 different spinners. 1 drop unlubed, don't get. 1 drop lube, you probably should have 1. absolutely, just to feel the smoothness. If you've never felt the smoothness, you need to feel the smoothness. You owe it to yourself. Terrapin, I can't recommend at the price. Spinetic, these are hard to recommend as well if you've got some of this stuff over here. So if you've got the, whoops, these right here. If you've got this going on, you probably don't need these. But again, these are ones you can definitely get. So this would be my real recommendation here. Have this in your setup at all times and have a few to spare, so that you can try what you like and put in what you like. One thing I should say, if you stuck around me this long, thanks. The bearings that are offset like this, I find if I do a table spin with the bearing up like this and I flip it over, I get an extra upwards of 2 minutes in some cases with this flipped over. I don't know what it is. It probably just has a little less friction, a little less it's rubbing against when it's like this, maybe. It doesn't feel any different in hand. Like if I flip it over this way or this way, I don't really notice a feeling difference in it. But if I'm doing a long time table spin, I find that with this cage up, I get better spin times. So, I think that's all we need to say, boy. Oh, one other thing. I have a little list here because there were things I knew I was going to forget. So, I didn't find a correlation in terms of spin time scaling. So one thing that I was trying to find was maybe a faster way to test bearings and see how their spin time was. So if I took this, obviously isn't a stick, but if I took this bearing and spun it on here, boom, I get 20 seconds. And then if I did it on here, and then I got 30 seconds, right? So there is a 30% difference. If I scale that up into, say, like a Zen Duo, I would not find any correlation that was consistent between different bearings and different spin times. As I scaled up from, say, to a stick, to a small bearing like a Zen Duo, to some like a medium-sized bearing like a Spinetic X, to kind of a slightly higher, slightly larger like a Aventador or a Busy Minds, like the full-size Busy Minds in brass was one of my testers, to a Triton. It wasn't like it would be consistent, like, oh, 30% difference on the stick, 30% difference in the Zen Duo, 30%, no. Some of them were like 20 seconds on the stick, some of them that were 20 seconds on a stick versus almost a minute on the stick. The actual one that had the lower time spun longer in the Zen Duo, but then less in the Triton. So I couldn't find any direct correlation in terms of spinners and spin times. So just because some of these had really good spin times in the Triton, you might actually find a different one having better spin times in a smaller spinner. So that really, I think, is all we need to say. This has definitely been my longest video. It's been the longest one coming. I'm going to take all this stuff and I'm going to set it on fire because I'm sick of testing bearings, y'all. It's been exhausting trying to do this. But I'm happy to put something out there for you. If you guys got something out of it, great. But you know what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to enjoy bearings for what they are. I'm not going to worry about the science and the exact specifics and testing them over and over. My Triton's going to get a break. It's going to be glorious. So thanks for checking out the channel. Appreciate all the love that I get. It feels like the love just keeps rolling in. I love all of you guys too. I love all the chats. I love everything that we get. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Really, y'all. Kisses.